I'm Rayna Rapp, and I'm honored to have been asked to speak at this plenary, but I suspect that virtually any of the full-time academics in this room could have done this job. We're all skilled jugglers on the academic-activist interface. Nonetheless, having been drafted, I'll claim the privilege of age to say a few obvious things, having spent almost 4 decades climbing various academic ladders while trying to integrate assorted social justice causes, however you define them, into teaching, research, writing, consulting, professional associations. First, and most obviously, your ability to configure a personal position on the interface where academic labor and social movements meets on your time, it depends a lot on your time in history. Resilient relations between various social justice causes, including, of course, the ones we meet to discuss and plan to influence here at Tarrytown, are quite contingent. And it was my luck to be part of the generation of 68ers working in civil rights, anti-war activism, and the women's movement. That was the good news. The bad news was that we academic activists always felt substantial pressure to leave our college campuses and quote-unquote be relevant in wider communities. After all, we had a war to end, so what was I doing paying so much attention to my beloved dissertation topic, which obsessed me? Nonetheless, I managed to hold on by the skin of my teeth in graduate school, and I was suitably grateful when my research, writing, and teaching were kidnapped by the then nascent women's movement. I learned to take comfort from something Linda Gordon, the historian, said at a women's health organization in which she was asked, as her book, Women's Body, Women's Right, which was an absolutely groundbreaking moment in the history of then absolutely hidden history between feminism and the birth controllers and what was going on there. She was asked, but how do you relate to both the movement and academia? And she said, without thinking twice, it was very helpful to me, well, I take my questions from the movement, but my answers depend on the archive. She was really signaling that if you stick it out in academia, you're always going to experience a huge tension of time and translation, which is what I understand Rajani to have been speaking about. Movement needs are immediate. They often demand information in accessible form yesterday. But scholarly work usually takes months and years to produce. It often yields complex, sometimes contradictory results, and it gets published at a snail's pace. So we juggle. Second, becoming proficient as a lifelong juggler requires an ability to prioritize projects, whether consulting in genetic counseling programs, serving as a background source for journalists or policymakers, rewriting the canon, especially textbooks that are widely used in community colleges, as well as four-year liberal arts institutions, or participating, as did many of the people in this room in my generation, in inventing women's studies and its intersections while building institutional homes across other lines of marked identities. Racial, ethnic, disability studies come to mind. The demands are continuous, and we learn to expect, even embrace, a lot of juggling across competing causes and projects. At every turn, we university-bound occasional activists are confronted with the complex institutional and ethical issues of access to resources, and we all try to set up connections that make the walls of the academy a bit more porous, a bit more transparent. So community-based groups can use the assets we denizens of universities are privileged to have. Scheduling and publicizing speakers, showing films, organizing teach-ins, inviting activists to talk in our classes. This is all a no-brainer, but it requires that you be open to social movements which will find their way to your door, and sometimes you will find your ways to theirs as well. And sometimes it requires tough judgment. Just say no. There have been any number of times when I've been asked to do something which, in my estimation, either because of my own expertise and its limits, or because I don't like what that group stands for, I've had to say no, and that puts you in a very uncomfortable position in relation to social movements. Often what I do means placing students, in my case, in NGOs that do international health and health policy, or as interns in community-based women's health groups, or in disability rights projects, or directing them to campus groups struggling, for example, to organize college students who grew up with IEPs, who have experienced special ed and has now kind of morphed what they're doing to understand neurodiversity in the classroom and in institutions. institutions. As I said, there are academics all over this room and all over the U.S. Academy who interface with social movements and policy-relevant conversations very directly, far more directly often than I do, especially if they are teaching in a law school or perhaps a school of nursing or medicine or dentistry. Lisa's inspirational work with social justice law clinics is something I hope she'll also talk about tonight. In my world, the world of anthropology, there's always teaching to be done about race as a biopolitical issue, deeply threaded through the history of our field, about gender and health, globalization and health, social movements in the global South, which need to be squarely integrated into what young Americans, especially young Americans, learn about U.S. influences and corporate policies as they directly affect life and death in Africa or Asia or Latin America. Not all of the issues on which I conduct research and teaching are about genetics, but genomic technologies and findings now wind their way through many other processes, for example, current work on pharmaceuticals or the use of prenatal genetic testing and other ARTs, or my current work in special ed. So how do we go forward? Well, here are some of the things I always have to think about as I go about my daily routines of juggling. The first is that movements will find you as much as you will find them. Stay open. The second is you have to learn again and again how to write for multiple audiences, op-eds and activist blogs, as well as scholarly journals and presses. Be prepared to continually learn how to make your individual research and teaching resources more accessible. Third, acknowledge the limits of coalition as well as our aspirations for them. As a professional skeptic, I find myself repeating Gramsci's old saw every day like a mantra: pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. Maybe I'm getting old, or maybe the times simply require more sober analysis, or maybe I've secretly become a Zen Buddhist. It seems increasingly clear that I, indeed we, as individuals and as collectivities, need to stay on our own chosen paths to keep circumnavigating the stupa of social justice as best we can understand it. Our victories are always preludes to the next defeat and round of struggle. Our steps simply open a window on a shifting landscape we're helping to create, poised to analyze whatever comes next. At the planning conference call to get this session together, Jeremy rightly emphasized that the challenges of scientific literacy can be made accessible and digestible to a large audience, but it takes focused work. We academics are teachers and communicators. We develop a certain credibility through our expertise, occasionally testifying or deploying statistics and other powerful methods in various public locations. And Jeremy asked, turning the question around, how can activists help academics? Wow, well, you are our key respondents in keeping us sane, orienting our worldview, and sometimes you are our best research assistants or our most treasured collaborators as we figure out where our work focus is best placed. We are always who we are in relation to who you are and what we collectively manage to morph into being. Yet Jeremy also referred in that call to the elephant in the room. Maybe you're about to say this, Jeremy. I hope I haven't stolen your point. And that is our lopsided relationships right here at the Tarrytown table. Far more of us are academics than full-time policy-involved activists. As such, we also have lopsided access to resources. We've got middle-class salaries, most of us, perhaps for life, that come attached to health insurance and entree to institutional perquisites. Mostly, activists and policy focus groups don't have those things. At the same time that we build coalitions, we know that our collective and respective timeframes and access to support are often structurally out of sync. So how can we best position our privileged support structures in academia to most effectively contribute to public awareness and action? We all need one another and many, many more to join us as genomic technologies seep unevenly but rapidly into the farthest reaches of our increasingly connected globe, often with unanticipated consequences, as well as the consequences we hope to slow down, scrutinize, and regulate. Tarrytown is an especially precious and exciting venue for this discussion. We all need to stay on our important paths, open to the excitement of collaborations and the spread of a social justice perspective, whether in the classroom, the halls of Congress, or our local nonprofit health clinic. Thanks to everyone for being here.